Hi, everyone. Today we have Mark Lowcock as our guest. Mark was the head of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs before he left in 2021, I believe, around June. And currently he is a visiting professor at the Department of International Development at the London School of Economics. And he is also a distinguished non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development in Washington, D.C. He has recently written a book titled Relief Chief, a manifesto for saving lives in dire times. Today, we will have a conversation about some of the themes of his book, in particular in relation to the crisis in the Horn of Africa, Tigray in particular, and Ethiopia in general. So Mark, welcome to TIGAT, and thank you for agreeing to do an interview with us. It is really an honor to have you here as my guest. And I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your new book, Relief Chief, a manifesto for saving lives in dire times. I know that your book is on global humanitarian work in general, but in our interview today, we will try to look at it through the prism of Ethiopia in general and Tigray in particular. So to start with, can you maybe tell us about the general themes of your book with a focus on its relevant parts to the crisis in Tigray, Ethiopia, and the broader Horn of Africa?
Well, thank you very much. And I'm pleased to have a chance to have a conversation with you. So the book basically is a description of all of the humanitarian crises around the world that I was dealing with when I was the head of humanitarian affairs at the UN, and also a long list of things I think could be done to make humanitarian responses more effective around the world. So in terms of the places I talk about, we cover the crisis affecting the Rohingya, who were expelled basically at the point of a gun from Burma, Myanmar into Bangladesh. There's a long chapter on the war in Yemen. There's a very long chapter on the Syria crisis. There's a chapter on the Sahel. There's a chapter on the Horn of Africa, including Ethiopia. And there's a chapter on natural disasters around the world, storms and floods and typhoons and earthquakes and so on. And then the second part of the book is basically trying to explain what could be done to make the humanitarian system more effective than it is at the moment, but from a perspective which is realistic, which doesn't pretend that the UN or humanitarian agencies have powers or influence that they don't have. But it talks about things that could be done realistically to improve how people who need help in crises get better help.
So I think with that, maybe I'll just move a little bit more focus again to Tigray, the Horn of Africa. I know that before you left, you were a little bit outspoken. I think you were outspoken actually about the situation in Tigray a lot. And then after you left, you wrote an article, a very good article, I should say, for the Center for Global Development. And in it, you describe it about the Abiy's aims. And you say this in particular. The first is, he has two aims. The first is to starve the population either into subjugation or out of existence. And the second is to do that without attracting the global opprobrium that would still, even in today's fractured political environment, arise from deliberately causing a massive famine, taking millions of lives. Now, when you said those things, things were actually relatively better than I should say today. So can we say that Abiy has succeeded indeed in these aims, and that the global, the international community, the aid agencies have failed in this in their mission to protect vulnerable communities?
So let me start by saying that, as I say in the book, I followed Ethiopia for a long time, more than 30 years. My first job was being involved in the mid-1980s with the response to the famine, which took 1 million lives, particularly in northern Ethiopia, including in Tigray. And I talk a lot about how much I'd admired over the following 30 years the progress that was made in Ethiopia, giving people much better lives than had been the case earlier, and how tragic I thought it was, how devastated I was personally to see what then happened from late 2020. And I did the best I could when I was at the UN to draw attention to those problems and to try to get agreement from everybody that people who needed humanitarian assistance should get that assistance. And I've been quite frank and straightforward in the book about the things that I thought should have happened that didn't happen. And you've quoted an article I gave. Now, I should say, Gabriel Christos, that I haven't been able to follow over the last few months the situation in northern Ethiopia in the way I was able to previously. So I'm not completely up to date with the situation now, but everything I hear leads me to believe that it's a really absolutely terrible, dire situation. I don't know the detail of it, but of course it's also in the context of other things going on in the world, which have diverted attention from Ethiopia and from some other places as well. You know, there was, from the middle of last year, a huge focus on Afghanistan, been a huge focus on the pandemic. Since Putin invaded Ukraine, there's been a huge focus on that. And the situation across the world now is the worst food crisis the planet has seen for many decades. And Ethiopia is part of that, not just in Tigray, actually, but in other parts of the country as well. There's a really serious food crisis. So is Somalia, so are other parts of the Horn. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me at all for you to say there's been a dramatic deterioration in the situation in Tigray over recent months. But I don't know the level of detail about all that. But it doesn't surprise me at all for you to hear you say that. The issue is, well, what can be done about that now? And it is a huge problem that there are all these other issues going on around the world. It's proving difficult to get enough attention of the global community and the policymakers to the situation in Ethiopia, especially the situation in Tigray.
Yeah, indeed. Those other crises like the Ukraine crisis have totally eclipsed crises in the Horn, for example. But so let's come back. I think this is probably more related to the themes of your book. Recently, you say that Ethiopia blocked the declaration of famine in Tigray. It disputed the factors on the number of people in famine in Tigray and blocked the publication of the data. This is according to a page in your book. It also blocked open discussions in the Security Council. And we also remember that Ethiopia expelled a lot of UN staff from Ethiopia. And there's just a litany of Ethiopia taking action on the UN agencies in Ethiopia and their personnel. So I heard you say that the UN system is broken, but actually to me, it feels like it is it has a problem in design. It's wrongly designed for a country that is basically accused of committing crimes to be able to block decisions, processes, is kind of like, for me, hugely problematic. So how do you see that? And are there suggestions, for example, for removing such design problems in the UN system, in the humanitarian system, in your book?
Well, firstly, yes, I talk a lot about those issues, and you quote accurately some of the things I've said in the book about what I thought the Ethiopian authorities were doing to prevent a declaration of famine. This was in basically in the middle of 2021. In terms of things being broken, what I actually said was that the famine declaration system is broken. It's very difficult to declare a famine if that declaration is prevented and obstructed by the government of the country in which it's taken place, because the declaration has to be made by UN agencies, and member states of the UN are, can block those kinds of declarations. So that turns out to be a design flaw in the system for declaring famines. More broadly, on the sort of structures of the UN is an organization of member states. I mean, that is how it's defined. And so on one level, you can complain about the implications of it being an organization of member states where governments, whoever happens to be the government, the recognized government in a place, gets to speak for the country. On another level, that just is the design. So the question is whether there are other fora where issues that turn out to be difficult and impossible to discuss in the UN can be discussed. People complain a lot, for example, about the fact that a few countries have vetoes in the Security Council. And I have some sympathy for that complaint. But on the other, we need to understand why those vetoes exist. And the only basis on which powerful countries around the world were willing to join and allow the creation of the UN in the wake of the Second World War was that some of them would have a veto. I think it would be a good idea if that veto were removed in the case, for example, of humanitarian issues. But the fact is, removing the veto would have to be agreed by the people who have the veto. And they're not going to do that. So I entirely share people's frustration about it, but it's one of those issues you can be frustrated about, but not actually be able to do very much about. What I've said in the book when it comes to famine declaration is what we need is a new system which is not susceptible to the same blockages by country governments. That would be a good idea, but it's not possible to make it a system which is run and owned by countries. It would have to be separate to that. It would have to be non-governmental in some way. Now, of course, there are disadvantages with a non-governmental system, just as there are with governmental systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You said recently, I think it was during the launch of your book in the stage in the London School of Economics, that you say that the humanitarian organizations are, well, doing okay, but that they need to do better. If I'm quoting you wrongly, you can correct it, but something to that effect. I, as someone coming from Tigray, feel like actually the UN agencies could be dangerous, opposite to their mission. So even for people like us, like Tigrayans in a relatively powerful country that wants to eliminate you, and where the rulers kind of conform a bit to some Western interests, the UN system and powerful international organizations actually side with the oppressors. And we have seen this. There are like ample evidence about this. We have observed many UN agency heads engaging in demonizing Tigrayans, accusing them of crimes. So For example, I remember the UNDP head wrote that Tigray was a cancer in the Ethiopian body politic. That's a note that was written to the Secretary General. And we've seen the international migration head in Ethiopia saying she would never go to Tigray and that the TPLF is dirty. And we've seen, like, for example, the head of the humanitarian agencies in Ethiopia engaging in really kind of similar language, adopting the government language propaganda. So when we look at the UN system as Tigrayans now at this moment, we actually feel that they are against us. They are not only are they not doing their mission, their work, the work of protecting people, but they are actually even part of the system to oppress you, to collaborate with the oppressors. So I just want to say, do you see that, you know, that the UN agencies could also be dangerous? Do you see cases like this in other areas as well? And what do you make of that?
Well, firstly, I talk in the book about loads of examples of where humanitarian agencies provide help to people, more than 100 million people around the world, and certainly save a lot of lives, millions of lives every year, I think. It is obviously extremely difficult to do that when the government of a country who has military control tries to prevent you doing that. That's obviously a very difficult environment to work in. And, you know, I saw that, for example, in Syria, during the course of the civil war. It's incredibly difficult for humanitarian agencies who are consistently blocked by the government of Syria with the help of the Russians and others. It's really difficult to get help to people in those circumstances. I don't know the examples of quotes you've given from people who you say are UN staff. I certainly don't agree with any of those things you've ascribed to them. I've never heard Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, say anything like that. I think at the leadership level of the UN, there's a very high level of understanding of the huge suffering that's happened in Tigray, and there's been huge efforts made to try to persuade those with political power and ability to do something about this, that they should let aid in and that innocent people should receive assistance. At the end of the day, the UN has tools which add up to asking people to do the right thing, encouraging, suggesting, reminding them of their obligations. But the UN the UN is not the world's army. It can't force countries with powerful militaries to do the right thing. So there needs to be a recognition of the limitations of the power and authority that has been given to the UN. I completely understand why this is so frustrating and so unsatisfactory from the perspective of Tigrayans and people who care about Tigray. I am someone who cares about Tigray. You know, I've visited it and I have, you know, spent time trying to provide better help for people there. So I don't, you know, I do understand how frustrating and unacceptable all this is from your point of view.
I was quoting, actually, these are people, there were two leaked videos from Ethiopia, and they have been accepted as leaked videos. And in fact, following that, some of the people have been recalled. But these are about the UN, the heads of UN agencies in Ethiopia. I know since you left, you probably haven't been following those developments. But I think even on the UN Secretary General himself, I will be honest, I think the way Tigrayans see it is that he hasn't done his job. He hasn't spoken about Tigray at all. Almost you could say sometimes repeating Abiy Ahmed's words that Eritreans are not there, just a lot of things. So there were moments where he can speak. I think that's one of the authorities he has. But we don't remember a day when he spoke even a little bit forcefully about this. And that's why we kind of like, so in Tigray, maybe, I don't know if, I don't know how much you follow Ethiopia, but Tigrayans are very strong believers in multilateral organizations. That has to do with Meles's legacy and also the TPLF. But now the sentiment is completely changed, that these organizations are actually tools for such type of crimes as well, as I said. So really, I think the assessment is very bad. But I want to move a little bit to another topic. And that is that in your book, you seem to believe that Meles made a mistake in implementing the federal model or in ruling the country with a coalition of regional or national parties or ethnic parties, as you call them. We don't call them ethnic parties, but instead of promoting Ethiopian unity, where, I'm quoting here, the various ethnic groups should have been encouraged to think of themselves as Ethiopian first and foremost, subjugating their ethnic and tribal origins. You say this as Mandela encouraging Meles to do this, but I think you also kind of like seem to support that idea. For this type of thinking, and this is not only yours, Mark, we've seen it with a lot of other organizations, a lot of other countries, that Ethiopia should be unified, unity should be promoted. That type of language is extremely problematic for Ethiopians like Tigrayans and other historically subjugated community nations. First thing is because the meaning of it is that it means what Abiy Ahmed is doing now. That means subjugation, that means war, that means devastation, that means cultural and linguistic imposition. So we've seen that Abiy is trying to do that, and we've seen what that means. Is doing this crime in Tigray in the name of unity. Now, when we hear that people like yourself and other international actors repeat these words, we get shocked. I'll be honest. Many people get shocked about this because that is what it means: the subjugation, the oppression, the killing, the genocide. That's what it represents for us. And given that you have shown, in our discussion so far, you've shown that there's not really so much the UN can do if the country doesn't cooperate, it seems like the logical thing for people like Tigrayans and other oppressed minorities is to push for independence, to be UN recognized entities, because that seems the only way to exist as people, because there are no other options. There are no ways of protecting for people like us, as we have seen now. But instead, you kind of like are implying that Ethiopian unity should be there, not only you, but also others. These are very contradictory things where there are no ways of protecting people. I think, shouldn't it make sense to encourage people to be independent, to use their self-determination rights, and to be part of the community of nations so they can get some way of protection?
Well, you made a very long statement there, which misrepresents quite a lot of what you ascribe to me, and also it doesn't really do fair justice to views that Antonio Guterres has expressed. I think you should really go and look at some of the things he said during the course of the crisis on his concerns about the situation in northern Ethiopia and Tigray. He's quite widely quoted on that, and I think it would be better for you to quote him fairly. You ascribe to me things that are said in the book that I made clear are not my views, that they are things that said by other people. That description you gave is one that is said that Nelson Mandela raised with Prime Minister Meles. So, you're getting into a series of things that are not really my area of expertise and responsibility in the past when it comes onto the political agenda. I think what's happened in Tigray is absolutely appalling, and I've spoken out very clearly and loudly about that. And I think that there should be much more humanitarian assistance getting in, that the innocent victims should be given food and medicines, that there needs to be some way of moving forward with the political process to deal with the underlying issues. but I'm not going to get into a kind of political polemic debate on those kinds of things that have never been my areas of specialism, or you know, things that I've had responsibility for on the political future of a country I'm not a citizen of.
Mm. No, I completely understand. I understand that. But so maybe I think these are the questions I want to ask. But as the final question, I would like you maybe to reflect a little bit on what would how would the points or the reforms that you are suggesting in your book benefit, for example, in solving the crisis in the Horn of Africa in general, and in Tigray in particular, in the short term and in the long term? Maybe we can close with that.
Well, in the short term, there's a very severe food security crisis playing out across the world now, and including in a very acute way in a number of countries in the Horn. And I published a piece yesterday which sets out basically 4 things that need to happen to deal with that. What's the world's worst food security crisis for many decades? Firstly, there needs to be more grain brought onto the international markets, either by drawing down reserves from countries which hold reserves, or also preferably by accessing 20 million tons of grain, enough for 400 million people, which are basically blockaded in the ports of Ukraine. Secondly, there needs to be a recognition that these disruptions to agricultural markets are not going to be fixed in the short term, and there needs to be a increase in planting, an increase in availability of fertilizers and other things that will maintain agricultural productivity, so that if, as is likely, grain production that's previously been available from Ukraine and Russia isn't going to be available on the global markets in the next couple of years or so, there's some compensatory production from other places. Thirdly, there needs to be a lot of fiscal assistance to countries which have effective safety nets, which could provide food to all of their populations in need on a neutral, impartial, reasonable way, but are constrained from doing that by the fact that they're fiscally in a very tight position or heavily indebted. The international institutions need to provide more financing for countries in that situation. Then fourthly, and most importantly of all, there does need to be a large increase in humanitarian assistance for those countries, including a number in the Horn of Africa, where people will only survive if they get enough assistance from international humanitarian agencies. There needs to be both a large increase of financing to pay for a scale up in assistance to people who are on the verge of starvation, and renewed efforts to access people, including people in northern Ethiopia, from whom you know, there are blockades or military activity or other things which are preventing them getting assistance at the moment. And I set out quite a lot of things in the book about how all those things could be achieved. In the long run, to answer the other part of your question, the only way to reduce the frequency of these kinds of problems is for countries to develop in a peaceable and secure way. You know, rich countries don't suffer famines. Peaceful countries don't suffer famines. So what's happened over the last 50 or 60 years in most parts of the world has been, there's been dramatic improvement in you know, income levels and livelihoods. And what needs to happen is for those places which haven't enjoyed the benefits of that global progress, including parts of the Horn of Africa, including now after 30 years of progress, all the reverses we've seen tragically in Ethiopia, especially in Tigray. We need to get back onto a positive development, peaceful, secure, stable trajectory. Otherwise, the problems we're seeing at the moment are going to persist into the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I have finished what I want to ask you, but I would I would like to give you, maybe there are topics I didn't touch upon or I didn't ask you. So are there other points you would like to add, Mark?
Well, I've written a long book and I spent my adult life trying to deal with these developmental and humanitarian problems around the world. Over the last 50 years, there's been quite a lot of progress on some things, but it hasn't been everywhere. And now we're seeing reverses. What I'm trying to do in the book is set out a list of ways in which the current problems we're facing can be dealt with effectively. So I hope that if people get a chance to look at the book, they'll see not just the bad things, but the scope for making progress and moving forward as well. That's what needs to happen.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you and to hear your views on Ethiopia and the crisis in Ethiopia and the broader humanitarian situation. I would like to thank you, and hopefully we will have another conversation, maybe another time on another topic. But for today, this was it.